What the Actual Fork podcast is co-hosted by two intuitive eating registered dietitians, yours truly, Sammy Previtt, owner of Fine Food Freedom, and Jenna Warner, owner of Happy, Strong, Healthy. We can't stand diet culture bullshit and love keeping it real. Our mission is for all humans to believe that they are made for so much more than chasing a smaller body. We are also here to share with you that food can be fun and pleasurable again. Although we are medical professionals, we are human too. We are not afraid to share our deepest, darkest secrets and how years of our lives were taken by diet culture. We started this podcast so no human has to feel alone in their journey towards food freedom. So get comfy and join us for a casual convo where you can expect to laugh, cry, learn, and grow.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of What the Actual Fork podcast. Today, Sam and I, who Sam was on here, she had to run, but she is here in spirit. We had the absolute pleasure of interviewing the PCOS dietitian, Miss Julie Duffy Dillon, at Food Peace Dietitian on Instagram. And basically, Sam and I had a huge list of questions each, all about PCOS, the things that we've heard, the things that we've had clients come to us and say, the misinformation that is just everywhere on social media about this diagnosis and condition. And Julie just set the record straight for us on all of it. She dropped some serious science. She gave us a ton of evidence. Everything that she said was so clear and so easy to digest, for lack of a better term, and understand. And I can speak for both Sam and I when I say that we are so thrilled to have her expertise to be shared with you, because to be honest with you, this is a topic that is so confusing, I think. And I just think that the amount of information out there is so vast and misinterpreted and misused. And Julie just really sets the record straight with over 20 years of experience, most of that being 100% in the PCOS space. So get excited. We're so excited to share this with you, and make sure you listen to the entire episode, because at the end, Julie shares a very special offer for all of our listeners and her community. So without further ado, enjoy.
Welcome back to another episode of What the Actual Fork podcast. Still getting used to saying that name.
I know.
And loving it. Today we have a very special guest. We have Miss Julie Duffy Dillon, which you may recognize her as the Food Peace Dietitian on Instagram. If any of you follow me or Jenna, pretty much if you've ever asked a question about PCOS, I've just sent you her Instagram handle directly. So I know a lot of my followers are definitely excited for this one. So thank you so much for being here with us, Julie.
Thank you for asking me to be on. It's like such a great time to be able, or I can't even talk, excuse me. It is way too early. It's so great to be able to chat with you. Oh my goodness. Let me drink more coffee.
This is early for all of us. This is an early recording time for everyone. And it's also still quarantine. So yes. This feels like 7 a.m. Okay.
You know, I'm not used to talking to like real live people. So please excuse my ability to talk in sentences.
Friday
good
morning.
Company.
Yeah. Friday morning. It's perfect. We'll get through it. So I didn't really give you, I feel like, a proper intro, but for those listening, Julie is a registered dietitian, an eating disorder specialist, a podcaster, an author. So we're just super excited to have you here and to really start off and let people get to know a little bit about you. We would love to just kind of hear your story of how you started in the field of nutrition and what led you to this niche of helping people with PCOS.
Sure. So I've been a dietitian for 20 years. And as I was finishing up my internship in, 1999, July 7th, 1999 was the last day of my internship. And I know the day because all of us dietitians remember how hard it was. But anyway, I remember not wanting to be a dietitian anymore. I was like, yep, that's it. I'm out of here. And I really wanted to be a therapist. But my mom kind of like talked me off the ledge. She's like, why don't you just go be a dietitian for at least a year? You just spent the last 5 years doing this. And I'm glad she did, because then I found a job in a really big hospital system, and my preceptor was like, yeah, that way you can just see everything and see if anything sticks. And I ended up about 6 months in working in pediatrics. They had like a pediatric nutrition team, and joined that team. And I really liked that. And I got into working with this pediatric endocrinologist. And at the time in the state of North Carolina, there were only two. And so if you were on the western side of North Carolina, I was your dietitian if you saw this pediatric endocrinologist. And he was someone who early on was really big into O-word, pediatric O-word stuff. And so my first like real job that I got into was helping kids lose weight, which is like super, oh my gosh, gross now, like looking back. And what I started to notice though, after just a few years of doing that work with families and with kids, is that I really didn't have what I needed to help people deal with like stress and like depression, family dynamics. And so I did end up going and getting a master's degree in mental health counseling. And that's when it was started to fall into place, like, oh, yeah, diets don't work. And that's when I read intuitive eating, and I fully kind of moved over to being a weight inclusive dietitian about a year after finishing that program. And I didn't want to work with anything related to like medical conditions at all at that point. I was really into food behavior and eating disorder recovery. I was really like into this whole like diets don't work, let me help you with your relationship with food, and reject diet culture. And people with PCOS just kind of kept coming into my office. They would like talk about their relationship with food and how it was so hard, and had these really intense carb cravings, and their doctors just pressuring them to lose weight. And, oh yeah, I have this thing called PCOS. And after I heard it, 10, 20, 30 times, I was like, I think I better figure out what to do. So I remember opening up the big Krause book, that nutrition therapy book that we all had to carry around the last 2 years of college. I don't know if they still do that.
Mine's on the floor right there.
Yeah, it's a good paperweight. But like, I remember opening it up, and there's like one little paragraph on PCOS, and it basically said, treat it like you would diabetes and help people lose weight. And I'm like, well, the whole treating like diabetes doesn't seem to work, because it seems to be a little different. And I'm like, diets don't work for most people, so why would they work for PCOS? So then I was like, kind of felt like this challenge of like, well, if no one's really finding a way to do this, there's got to be a way to help people without diets and PCOS. And so I luckily found some people who were kind of like doing things totally rogue in this area, and they took me under their wing. One person in particular, her name's Monica Woolsey. She passed away in 2017, but she was someone that taught me a lot about how to look at it from a different lens, and how harmful diets were for PCOS. And as I was like working in that area, you know how like these things are, as I was like connecting with some different tools that were outside of weight loss for PCOS, like people talk. So then friends started telling friends, and those friends told their friends, and that their friends told their OBGYNs. And so then I was like, wow, like this is all I'm doing now. It became really fun. And then I live in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is this little dinky town in the middle of North Carolina. And I think I was around 40 years old when I got a phone call that a reality show wanted me to be on their show to talk to their like lead, is it character? I don't know what you call it in a reality show. The lead person who has PCOS and is in eating disorder recovery. And I was like, oh, I didn't think this was ever, I thought I like passed that, area of my life. I'm like too old for Real World, and like that's what I watched when I was young. So like I was already married, couldn't be on The Bachelor or Bachelorette, whatever. And so I was like, okay. So then being on, it was the show's My Big Fat Fabulous Life. Whitney Way-Thor is the person who that show is about, and she happens to live in Greensboro. And so I did that about, I think 4 years ago now. And that really opened up more opportunities to work with PCOS. So ever since then, it's been really all I talk about all day long. And it's like such an honor to talk about it. And I am so happy that there's more people like willing to entertain the idea of rejecting diets with PCOS, because it's about time. They've been through the ringer. So thanks for letting me come on here to talk more about it. It's like, I want everyone to know you don't have to diet with PCOS.
My head is spiraling because I have like all of these questions, all of these things I want to say. I'm just so excited. Can we just start with, just defining what is PCOS?
Sure.
Are there different types of it, like diabetes? How is it diagnosed? Anything that you can share from a medical perspective?
Sure. So stop me if you have any questions, but polycystic ovarian syndrome is an endocrine disorder that has metabolic, reproductive, and psychological consequences. It happens in people with ovaries, and it's estimated to be 1 in 5 to 1 in 10 of people with ovaries will experience PCOS. And it is something that most people are told, like, oh, when they get the diagnosis, like, oh, here's birth control, come back when you're trying to get pregnant and just make sure you lose weight and you have to cut out carbs and sugar. That's basically all that people get. But what we know is that PCOS is something that affects pretty much every cell of the body because of the hormonal involvement. And the misconception with it is that weight is a cause of PCOS, but for some people, weight is just something that changes with PCOS. Like the PCOS is behind it because of the metabolic consequences of it. And part of, like, there's so many things that are like wrong and what people are told with PCOS, but I think a lot of people just think it has to do with their ovaries and that's it. And that it's caused by some kind of ovary thing and their weight, when in reality, it starts in the hypothalamus, that part of the brain. And that's what leads to like this hormonal imbalance. And this hormonal imbalance, again, it ends up affecting just about every cell in the body. So people end up feeling like really fatigued. They have lots of carb cravings. It's really common to have a mood disorder because of the hormonal involvement. And the way to know if you have it or not is they're kind of in a those people, researchers and the people who make decisions in regards to medical conditions. But currently there are 2 criteria people need to meet out of 3. And I'm being kind of ambiguous because there's talk of changing how it's diagnosed, but currently there's the Rotterdam criteria. And again, there's 3 different kind of criteria, but you have to meet 2 out of 3 of them in order to get diagnosed with it. And those 3 are basically not ovulating or having like an irregular period. The second one is either clinical or like visible signs of high androgens like testosterone. And the third one is cysts on the ovaries. So it's always interesting, kind of like a Trivial Pursuit kind of question. Like, you don't have to have cysts on your ovaries to have polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is why they need to change the name. And but it can be, it's also like a diagnosis of exclusion. So really, in order to get diagnosed with it, you have to make sure you rule out all these other things. And it's something that, unfortunately, again, people are told that they caused because of weight or, something they ate or something like that. And that is not true. We know that it is something that's passed down through families. Like, there's a genetic kind of connection. There are some environmental sides to it, just like any disease, but it comes from your family tree, basically. So I hope that helps explain it. Okay.
Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely. So and Jenna, I know we're probably just going to keep going back and forth with like rapid fire questions. My next thought process is, so thinking about the people that you work with, right? And someone just gets diagnosed with PCOS, and hopefully they're blessed and enough to find your page. But if, let's say, they were just told by a doctor, okay, you have PCOS, you need to lose weight, cut out carbs, cut out sugar. And then they come to you. How do you handle that conversation?
Oh, goodness. Well, that's like the norm. So what I would say, it is so sad. And, a lot of people that I talk to with PCOS have experienced an eating disorder, whether it's been diagnosed or not. Some people already are in a place of like trying to recover from it and rejecting diets. And so they're like, what do I do now? Like, they're telling me I have to do this. And I think it's confusing, unfortunately, for the consumer, like for the patient, the client who's being told by the one in charge, their doctor, that they must do this. And, so it's not easy in a sense. But what I like to tell people is, here is the research as I'm seeing it so far. Let's talk about your own research, your own data, your own lived experience with diets. Let's talk about that. And when I ask someone with PCOS when they started dieting, a lot of them say, I was 7, 8, 9, 10. Sometimes it's 12 or 13, but it's almost always like between 7 and 13 years of age. And they're 30 years old coming to see me. So half their life or more has been spent dieting. And really considering that data, how many years do you have to diet until you can say, okay, I tried enough? Yeah. And I think like half your life is plenty. And I say that like appreciating as someone with thin privilege, like I don't have to experience any kind of like radical appearance by rejecting diets as a thin person. So, our clients with PCOS who are in a higher weight body, that's like they're choosing to then be this like radical person. But anyway, so that's a lot of where we start is like, okay, this is your data. And then also this is what the science is telling us. And the weight science with PCOS is pretty clear that there's not any solution that helps long-term and helps most people. There was this huge like evidence-based guideline. It was like a dissertation, basically. It was this huge paper that was released in 2018 that I think there was like 3,000 different researchers and clinicians who specialize in PCOS gathered. And in the nutrition section, it says, I used to know the quote exact, but I don't think I have the exact quotes. So this is a paraphrase, but basically there are no diets that we have found in the literature that help PCOS long-term and help most people. And then it says, so just pick one. Like, really? Like, are we that married to it? Come on. So yeah, like we don't have one to recommend. So let's consider something else. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so that's what I would say.
Do you think, just so now it's my turn, we're like volleying the ball back and forth, but do you think that PCOS is overdiagnosed? And I say this from personal experience, and actually my episode that I talk about this is going to be released the week before yours. So I think
oh, cool.
Perfect.
I'll have to listen. Yeah.
But when I was deep into my diet culture journey and had like my own personal diet culture issues and had lost my period for a really long time, I was diagnosed with PCOS despite having I got my hormones tested and everything was normal. And I was clearly wasting, like I had very little body fat, like physically presenting not healthy. And I had no period, but I had like, the chin hair, like the one chin hair and that was like those two things were, and I had acne, but it was clearly from being malnourished.
Yeah.
Looking back on it. And I was given that diagnosis and told, it's going to be very difficult to get pregnant one day. And let's send you for more testing. And I had some sort of, I had the ultrasound.
Oh yeah. The internal ultrasound. Yeah.
That one. And they found no cysts on my ovaries, just no ovulation. And she kept the diagnosis. And then when I got my period back, when I healed, took care of myself, nourished my body, stopped over exercising, the acne went away. I gained weight because I needed to, and so on and so forth. She took the diagnosis away. And I never really questioned it. I was young and I was not informed and was like, wait a minute, like you gave me this diagnosis that I lived with for so long and then just took it away. Like, why didn't we talk about like potential eating disorders or like what the fuck you're doing to your body? Like, all of these other things. So like this topic really like hits home to me so much, because do you think that it's overdiagnosed?
So this is what I think about that. I mean, what you just referenced. Yeah. We need to rage, because here's the thing. I think fat phobia really fucks with things and on so many different levels. And No, I don't think PCOS is overdiagnosed for the most part. The area that I think it is overdiagnosed is in the regards of hypothalamic amenorrhea and people who are restricting. And it's like I keep saying the medical community, but really it's like all of healthcare, dietitians included. We just can't say that restricting is bad, And so, oh my gosh, like actually, eating just fruits and vegetables, or I don't know what you were doing, but like whatever kind of like
everything. I was doing everything.
Yeah. I mean, as dietitians, we get lots of great tools to practice disordered eating and eating disorders. But yeah, like following all these diet rules, like actually can be harmful. And that's something that I don't hear enough people actually naming. And that's where I do see PCOS getting misdiagnosed, is in that realm. But for the most part, statistically speaking, it seems to be underdiagnosed. And an area that really, I mean, if we want to rage, area that is really in this kind of like conversation. And I think this was like 2 or 3 years ago, there was a really, there was an article that was released that was like an editorial, and I think it was like an Australian kind of medical journal, where doctors were saying that PCOS was overdiagnosed, and then that also not everyone with PCOS needs to know they have it, because there's nothing that they can really do about it. It just leads to hysterics. And I don't know if you know where I'm going with this, but basically, as not everyone who has PCOS is a woman or identifies as a woman, but like in the article, the way I was kind of reading it was like, oh yeah, as women, we're not able to handle anything heavy enough, like not knowing how to treat a condition. So let's just keep it from her. And so that's, there's like this talk of basically like, why should we be diagnosing people with it if we don't even know what to do with it? And that worries me more. The whole thing with hypothalamic amenorrhea, when people will say, well, I'm a quote lean person with PCOS, I do honestly have a problem with like terming it lean PCOS versus not lean, just because people can be of any size with PCOS. And people oftentimes who were diagnosed with that quote lean PCOS, I think actually had hypothalamic amenorrhea the whole time. And there is a way to distinguish between the two. It has to do with like how many cysts are actually on the ovaries. And I think even the cyst, and it's not really cysts, the follicle size. And then also the FH to LH ratio is different. But anyway, that is like a really long answer to that question, but those are my thoughts on it. Like, I do think it's overdiagnosed when it comes to people who are in the throes of an eating disorder and more likely have hypothalamic amenorrhea. And for the rest, no.
Well, and I can't agree more with that. And Jenna, I know I don't know every detail about your story, but just knowing what you've shared on our previous podcast, like this was the doctor who, when Jenna got her period back and had gained weight, which needed to happen and was healthy, the doctor asked, "Are you okay? Do you want to talk about your weight gain?" So I think that's, yes.
And I was like, I just got my period for the first time in 3 fucking years. Like,
yes. So I think
your body did it. Your body, like, it healed by gaining weight.
Yes. And so I think, Julie, you hit the nail on the head there, where it's not that necessarily PCOS is overdiagnosed, it's that disordered eating and eating disorders are missed, right? Mm-hmm. And completely overlooked. And it's so frustrating. And yeah, I think we all need to rage. And Jenna, I can't imagine, having to live with a diagnosis that didn't exist. And what if that doctor would have been able to pick up on signs of disordered eating and eating disorder or whatnot?
Yeah. And that way of eating too is what basically doctors are expecting people with PCOS, especially those in higher weight bodies. That's what they're expecting them to do. Yeah. And, people that I've worked with, if someone saw them walking down the street, they would never in a million years think that they had anorexia because of their body size. But, people I've worked with, I'm not going to say numbers, but like we're eating less than like toddlers, basically, the amount of food that they were allowing themselves and still not losing weight, which led to people really just not being believed when they go to the doctor. So they're not treated like a human and not believed. So So yeah, I think that's another reason, like, why you experienced that too with Jenna, with that diagnosis, and like, I don't know, just like the way you were treated is like, just can't see restriction as a bad thing, you know?
There's just so much mess around this topic.
So much.
Like, and I'm grateful that they didn't jump to prescribe me. I think it's metformin is like the
Yeah, a lot of people do get that when they have hypothalamic amenorrhea accidentally. Yeah.
And I think that, and this is like totally off topic, and we don't have to jump down this rabbit hole, but I see
Okay.
keto being promoted a lot of times for people with PCOS/insulin resistance. Like, these terms get tossed around and like dragged through the mud like crazy. And I actually got into a war earlier in quarantine with some keto warrior on TikTok.
Nice. Good job.
And it was all about PCOS, because he basically was saying, like, whatever, you know what they say about anti-diet dietitians just promoting harm all over the place by telling people to eat, right?
We're neglectful. Yeah.
Right, we're horrible. I think someone told Sammy recently to get her license taken away. Like, that was my favorite.
And I told them to fuck off on TikTok. My video got reported, and then I got shadow banned. So
nice. Well, welcome. You finally have made it. Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
But those two terms get interchanged like very, very clearly, and people just jump and say, well, then you just have to take out carbs. How would you answer that?
Well, and in particular, I think it was the end of last year, I took a really deep dive on keto and PCOS, and I feel like it can be somewhat generalizable for people with insulin resistance, other conditions that have high insulin levels. But for like my deep dive, I specifically looked at the research on keto and PCOS. And honestly, I only found 2 research studies that looked at PCOS and keto, which is in itself infuriating, because it is what doctors are telling people and dietitians are teaching people with PCOS to follow to treat their PCOS. And when I looked at it, there was a 2020 research paper with 24 people that studied it for 12 weeks. And then there was a 2005 paper that studied 11 people for 24 weeks. And yeah, the shorter study showed that in 12-week duration that it improved some things like triglycerides and testosterone, and weight went down. It also was only 12 weeks long. And then the one that had 11 people it was 24 weeks long, only 5 people finished it. And there was no significant decrease in like insulin, glucose, testosterone, A1C, triglycerides. It helped a little bit with LH-FSH ratio, but again, over half of the people dropped out. And so I'm always like, okay, so you're going to do keto, or you're going to recommend keto for PCOS because 29 people were able to do it for 12 to 24 weeks. I'm like, that's just not enough data to like make this the end all be all. And here's the thing that's different, I think, for, I don't have PCOS. And so I don't really understand what it's like to live with it. But for at least 15 years now, I've been sitting across from people with PCOS, and the way they describe carb cravings, it just sounds like you're going to die if you don't eat carbs. Like, it's not just like, I have a hankering for something sweet, or I'm going to have another piece of bread with my spaghetti. It's just like, I am going to die if I don't eat that loaf of bread right now, which to me is like a whole different level of torture. And so we know higher insulin levels are a part of this. Like, there's something with insulin with PCOS that makes it not able to like open the cell door to let the glucose in. And so something kind of is wonky going on. And so the body is like, I'm starving. So it sends the craving for carbs. It also just sends more insulin, because it's like, well, we're sending more carbs in, so let's get some more insulin. And it just continues to go and go. And so if you were like a robot or like a petri dish or something like that, I think removing the carbohydrates would eventually do something, although we don't know if it would after 24 weeks, because most diet research shows even if a person continues to cut out carbohydrates, sugar or whatever, after about a year and a half, even if people continue it, it seems to make things get worse again. So, you know, if someone is, again, if someone's a robot, maybe it would for a little while, but what we don't know is like, this is actually something that, let me erase that. What we know is that for a person who, with like a real human with PCOS, this is something that not only we're not even sure if it's going to work, but it physically hurts to do this. And so we're expecting people with PCOS to use this really shitty scientific tool, you know, that has no research behind it. And even if no, it hurts. And even though they can't like go and have pizza with their family on Friday night or have some cake at a wedding, you know, like even though they're missing out on all these things, and it's like torture to their body. So I think there are so many other things you can do to help manage the hormonal imbalance with PCOS, and especially the insulin levels. Like there's a lot of things that people can do that have more research behind it. And also what I call like practice-based evidence. You know, 15 years working with people, I have been able to find some things that seem to really help with the symptoms of PCOS and feel good instead of like torture. So I'm a fan of that, you know?
Such a wonderful point you bring up. And I think when I went through my intuitive eating certification with Evelyn, going through just all the research with Tracy Tilka and just looking to at, like you were talking about diet research, that most, and I'm going to assume these two very extremely small studies don't include psychological or behavioral implications. So looking at these two, or however many people you said dropped out, it was only like 29% completed. Like what was their psychological space looking like, right? Like what were their behaviors? Were they,
that's exactly it. Yeah.
So did they develop eating disorders? You know, so it's wild. But I think just hearing how you're taking this conversation and such a great way to pivot for those who are listening that have PCOS, what are like your biggest tips for them, or where can they start? And I know that's such a hard question because everybody is so different, but what are some of those things you have found that have been so helpful?
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, it is very individual, and it's a condition that we really, for as many people who have it, we really don't have enough information. Like shame on us. We don't have enough to really provide some meaty recommendations, but there are some things that I recommend to most people with PCOS. And first and foremost, I think it's important to make sure you're eating enough. And I've had people who I would be talking to individually, like burst into tears when I asked them that question. And I'm like, what? At first I was like, what's going on with this? Like, why? I didn't know this was like a question that would provoke that. And again, these clients of mine that I would be working with, they would talk about restricting for years, decades, and being in a higher weight body. No one ever asked them if they were eating enough, and just assumed that they were eating too much. And lo and behold, they were not eating enough. And, you know, what we know is from the long-term research, you know, speaking of the Tolka and all the other like long-term diet studies that we've been able to look at. I know Tracy Mann also has a bunch. And what we've been able to find is that, again, whether a person continues on a diet or not, at the 2 to 5 year mark, what researchers are finding is it seems to be causing more inflammation. And that's important for people with PCOS because PCOS is a condition that has been found in the last 5-ish years to be connected with a pro-inflammatory state. And inflammation, I always kind of hesitate when I talk about inflammation because I think it is kind of like a diet culture buzzword. But, you know, and inflammation is important. It's a part of how our body is able to like, you know, use food and oxygen and be able to go through the day and repair and all that stuff. But with PCOS and the hormonal imbalance that's constantly going on, the body has to do so much more repair work that there's more inflammation. And what we want to do is like prevent that, because inflammation also has a connection with disease like diabetes and many other things. And so if a person with PCOS is already in a pro-inflammatory state, why would we recommend something that's going to make that worse? And dieting long-term, which people with PCOS are expected to do, is connected to higher inflammation. So yeah, I don't want that to happen. I want to decrease that. And eating enough is a way to do that. And that's where you may need to work with a dietitian, especially a dietitian who is training intuitive eating, someone who is going to be willing to actually believe you when you say like how much you're eating, and find out, yeah, are you eating enough? And from there, another part that's connected to inflammation and insulin is sleep quality. And it's estimated that 75% of people with PCOS have a sleep disorder. So why that's important is not getting enough sleep or deep enough sleep, all the different ways that I don't know, ways to describe sleep, like not having enough of it is something that's connected to higher insulin levels and more inflammation. So I've read some recommendations that say people with PCOS should get a sleep study done every other year, which I think is kind of a lot. And at least we can do them at home now for the most part, but still, especially when they were like, you have to go to a sleep study lab. I'm like, that's asking a lot, especially of like a parent or something. But anyway, at least every so often, whatever you and your doctor decide is best, make sure you get a sleep study. And, people with PCOS will be like, yeah, I have been told I snore a lot, or I always have to get up and pee a couple of times at night. And I'm like, oh, yep, you need to get a sleep study, because like that's a sign right there. And honestly, like eating enough and getting better sleep is like half of it right there. And that's like, that's not taking anything away. So that improves insulin levels significantly. And then from there's definitely like supplements people can experiment with. I also think that people with PCOS probably need more protein. I don't think they should take away carbs or fats or anything, but just that they probably just need more protein with what they're eating. So that's another part of it too.
I love that you brought this up in such a scientific way, because I always joke with people that like, unless you're allergic, have an intolerance to gluten and dairy, like diet culture makes you believe that that's the only thing that causes inflammation, when the reality is that your fear of gluten and dairy is actually causing the inflammation. And what you just said, I call them like the silent killers. Like sleep, stress, and body image are the three things that can promote inflammation in our body. And then you link a metabolic condition on top of that, and it's just adding fuel to the fire. So thank you for that perfect explanation.
Can we talk about gluten and dairy for a second?
Yeah, always. Look at Sammy's face.
Please. I would love to hear how, because and Jenna and I talk about this on so many episodes, and we want to be empathetic, but we also need to call people out kindly. When you see other dietitians that say they specialize in PCOS recommending a gluten and dairy-free diet to everyone, how would you respond to that?
I think her face says it all.
I don't know. I mean, whatever, but so, I mean, it's the whole everyone thing, right? Like that's something that's hard for me to swallow, especially as dietitians. Like that's a big part of like the contract that's like, doesn't really exist, but like what we basically are saying, how we're trained is to be individual with our recommendations. And with the gluten part, there isn't any long-term research that supports that eliminating gluten for people with PCOS is something that helps with things like insulin and inflammation. It may help that dietitian who has PCOS, who has cut out gluten. Well, that's fine. But the people I serve are people who have tried all those things and it just fucked with them. And so that's who I'm going to talk to anyway. So yeah, if it worked for you, then good, you're good at restricting. I mean, that's fine. And then the dairy piece is really interesting because it's definitely something that people in the PCOS circles, like when I pop into like chat rooms and just observe and Facebook groups and stuff and listen, dairy is a big thing that people talk about too. And, I didn't mention it yet, but food, like all food is inflammatory. Like that's something we need to keep in mind. Like every single food we eat causes inflammation. Like that's just like, because we're eating food. Like it's not that that's why it's always interesting when people are like, well, gluten is inflammatory. I'm like, well, so is that broccoli. I don't know. Like everything that we eat, breathing has some inflammation that comes from it. So like, no, that's not enough reason. But with the dairy piece in particular, there was some research that came out that supported a low dairy diet in PCOS and helping with lowering inflammation. And notice it wasn't no dairy; it was low dairy. And when the articles with the low dairy diet included was 2 servings of dairy. And I don't know about you, but for a lot of people, that's about what they have. And so, and then the flip side of it is that higher fat dairy, like the high, like whole milk, higher fat cheeses and yogurts, like the high fat dairy has been also researched to be linked to, I think it was like egg quality in PCOS. I can't remember off the top of my head everything it found, but it's been linked to like positive outcomes with PCOS. So what do we do with that? And so like with the dairy piece, that's why I tell people, I'm like, yeah, there's some limited studies that have found it, but it's like, it still had 2 servings of dairy in a day. And you may be already doing that. And it doesn't say no dairy. It doesn't take it away completely. And the gluten piece, what I have found just in my own like practice-based evidence is that when people experimented with eliminating it, they usually felt better for like 6-8 weeks. And then by like around the 3-month mark, they just were like, it's not doing it anymore. And so there must be some kind of temporary kind of change, which is really normal in nutrition science, right? Like all these 6-week studies show favorable outcomes no matter what diet it is. But then when you look at 12 weeks and then further out, it's like it doesn't have the oomph anymore. And that's whether a person continues or not, right? We have to keep saying that. It's not that they fell off the wagon or anything. I like burn that wagon down. But but yeah, those are my thoughts on gluten and dairy. I think it's always important to make sure we include that.
When you hear people say fall off the wagon, doesn't it make you think of Oregon Trail?
Yes. I was born in 75. And so that basically was my summer from 83 to maybe like 93.
I remember playing it in school, in elementary school. Like I remember that game so clearly. And now like you can't find it anywhere.
No. Fun times. Yeah.
Well, this was seriously so informative. And I mean, I just crossed off, I had my list of questions here.
Yay, good.
All of them. Sam, how about you?
I just want to I know we've already covered this, but I think this is a great way to wrap it up before we can tell people where to find you and what exciting things you have going on in your community. So if someone comes to you and says, do I need to lose weight to cure my PCOS? Like, how do you respond to that? I just want this to be like abundantly clear to our listeners.
So PCOS was not caused by your weight gain. So losing weight will not cure it. PCOS is a chronic condition that cannot be cured. I know I'm a Debbie Downer.
but I think that you say Debbie Downer, but I think they need to hear, everybody.
It's a reality.
Yeah. And we need to kind of just revisit that. Like when I asked you, what is the one thing or some things people can start doing? You said, are you eating enough? And I know that every single person that's listening to this that has PCOS has been probably most likely 99.9% of them told you need to eat less, you need to cut out, you need to restrict. So I think there's something so freeing about hearing that today and knowing that that's going to help take care of you.
Yeah. You don't have to torture yourself anymore, for sure. And I do hope having that reality check, and it can be sad, and I hope it also pisses you off that you were basically duped into thinking that you caused it, but there's no way you caused it. And having that kind of truth, I hope it helps to fuel you moving forward to just in a cheesy way, live your best life, instead of wasting your time on hating yourself and your body.
Love that. Thank you so much for all the clarity. And so for anybody listening who might have PCOS or know someone that has PCOS, do you have any exciting things going on in your community that could be helpful tools?
Yeah. So one thing that I do, I don't work with clients individually anymore. What I do is I serve people through a course that includes monthly coaching calls. And in February, I always do a 30% off coupon on my course. And this February, the coupon code is LOVE 2021. And if February is not a good time for you, I always run it again in September. Just want to give you that heads up. But the thing that's really cool with this course is that I have trained some dietitians who specialize in PCOS in the same way that I have. They are going to be joining me. So I'm going to add more coaching calls every month. So there's going to be at least another one. So I'm so excited about that. So there's a course that kind of takes you through a 12-step system. And then there's a workbook and lots of fun stuff like that. But then also at least twice a month having coaching calls too from me and another dietitian with PCOS, or not with PCOS, that helps people with PCOS rather. And so check that out at PCOSandfoodpeace.com.
Awesome. So perfect.
For everybody listening, I know we've said it a few times, but where can people most easily find you in addition to that resource? Sorry, brain fart.
That's okay.
Friday morning
research. And I was like, it's not a research, it's a resource.
It's not research. Well, my website's probably the best way just to connect with everything. And that's juliedillonrd.com. And I am on Instagram, like you said, it's Food Peace Dietitian.
We can't wait to see you on TikTok.
Yes, TikTok coming soon.
Maybe my 12-year-old can train me how to use it.
The TikTok world needs you. Your head would pop off if you read some of the things that people are prescribing, quote unquote, for PCOS. So just let me know when you join.
Okay, I will.
Guys, thank you so much for listening to another episode of What the Actual Fork Pod. We know there are a lot of pods out there, and we are so grateful that you are here listening with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, share with all your friends and faves, and follow along with us on social at What the Actual Fork Pod. We promise to continue to bring you the hottest topics, greatest guests, and the most fun you can possibly have while fighting diet culture bullshit. We love you, we appreciate you, and we will see you next week for a lot more fun.